Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to share some Happier Hour collection cards using the new Happier Hour collection from Spellbinders. This here is the Martini Mood press plate and die set. Some great sentiments to go with that image in there. Then we have the Sip Ole Sentiments press plate and die set. This one coordinates with the Sip Ole die set, so it's perfect for sentiments to go with that die set. And I love that these plates do a bunch of sentiments at once and then cut them out all at once. And for the Sip Ole die set, there's many different options to create different drinks with them. I'm going to be doing 2 different cards with that, coordinating it with the sentiment set. Then we have the Special Toast Sentiments press plate and die set, as well as the coordinating Special Toast die set. Again, perfect sentiments for those. Then finally, the Fountain Wishes Sentiments press plate and die set that coordinates with the Fountain Wishes die set. Again, I'm going to create a couple cards with that as well. And I love that those sentiment sets create a bunch of sentiments at once and cut them out all at once. And then last but certainly not least in this collection is the Linear Touch Rectangles and Tags die set. I'm going to be using this in a few different cards for some of the layers as well as other accents. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to foil my press plates. I'm also going to be using the BetterPress system with them. For some of my sentiments, I want them foiled. For some of my sentiments, I want them heat embossed with black embossing powder. So I'm going to have a ton of sentiments by the time this is done. Any of the ones that I don't use, I'll put in Ziploc bags, put them back in the package with that set, and I'll have them ready to go for future projects. So I have my glimmer system hot here, ready to go. I put my plates on the gray surface with the pattern side up, put the foil pretty side down, and I'm foiling on Hammermill Cardstock. Put the plates on top, press the timer button, and when that timer goes off, I take it out of the glimmer system, put it through the Platinum 6 machine. You need both the heat from the glimmer system and the pressure from a die cutting machine in order to do hot foiling. Then I'm going to do each one of those sentiment press plates so that I have foiled sentiments available for each one of them. When I have my glimmer system already hot, ready to go, I might as well do a bunch at one time. Another thing that I'm going to do is I have a solid hot foil plate. I'm going to solid hot foil all of these sentiments. Some of them I'm not going to be using as sentiments. I'm going to be using as mats, or at least one of them for sure. I'm going to be using them as mats for around one of the layers of my card. But sometimes a solid hot foiled sentiment just suits the card a little bit better. So I love having both of them, and it's always nice to be able to use up that excess foil. The stacking for each foiling is exactly the same. You put the plate on, put the foil pretty side down, and the cardstock on top. Plates on top, press the timer button, and once that timer button goes, you put it through your die cutting machine. Spellbinders has a list on their website of the compatible die cut machines with the glimmer system. Not every single machine is compatible there, but there are a bunch of them that work perfect with it. I'm using Prism hot foil here, so it is silver, but it has a holographic shine to it. It's one of my favorites of the glimmer foils. You could do it with any color that you want, but this is going to work well for the cards that I have planned in my head. Once I have all of the regular foiling done, I put that solid hot foil plate on the base of my glimmer system. And then I put each one of the pieces of foil pretty side down using some Hammermill cardstock again. And then with the stacking all stacked, I press the timer button. Once that timer button goes off, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine. So the solid hot foiling is exactly the same as the regular foiling. The only difference is you use that solid hot foil plate and you're using that excess foil that is left over from your first foiling. Now, sometimes when I foil, I get a little bit of over foiling, and I found for this set, it was only that last plate that did some overfoiling, and mainly that was because I used a new roll of foil and it seemed to want to lay down a little bit more. So the way that I fix it first is I use a little piece of Best Ever Craft tape. I have the 5/8 inch width one. I press it on my shirt or pants a couple times to take a little bit of the sticky off of it, and then I just put it onto the image or the sentiment. Usually I do this with sentiments. That's where I have the biggest issue, if you will, with overfoiling, and then lift that foil up, and you'll be amazed at how much comes up. Even if it looks like it's perfectly foiled, sometimes I'll do this because it just neatens it up and tidies it up and makes all the letters nice and sharp. Now, you don't want to use that Best Ever Craft foil or craft tape right off the roll because it is strong enough that it will lift up some paper. So make sure that you take a little bit of the sticky off of it. Now that I have my sentiments all cleaned up, I'm going to do the die cutting of all of them. For this, I line up the die, used Best Ever Craft Tape, and this time I used like the 3/8 inch one. The wider one is just, you don't need anything that wide. You're just wanting to make sure that that die stays in place while you're doing the die cutting, and I find that the thinner one works perfectly for that. Then I have my sentiments all die cut ready to go. And I'm going to do all of the die cutting all at once. I do most of it off screen because it's very repetitive. And I do that for both the foiled as well as the solid hot foiled. Next, I'm going to be doing my images on my BetterPress system. So all of these ones are going to be inked with VersaMark ink and then heat embossed with black embossing powder. This first image though, I'm going to be doing it on some distress watercolor cardstock because I plan on watercoloring this image. So I want to make sure that I have the right surface for that. But rather than just waste kind of a 1/2 quarter sheet there, I might as well do my sentiments at the same time. So I have them both on the BetterPress system, taping that paper onto that clear plate with a couple new pieces of Best Ever Craft Tape. I reuse this tape on here until it just doesn't really want to stick anymore. Typically it starts to tear and then break up a little bit, but you get a lot of use out of these pieces of tape. So a roll goes a really long way. It's actually amazing how many times you can use these pieces over and over again. I put a little bit of embossing powder tool on my cardstock and then inked my plates up with that VersaMark ink. Put the clear plate onto the base and run it through my Platinum 6 machine to press that image right into that cardstock. Then I can take it off of that plate, put it on a scrap piece of cardstock, and then pour on my embossing powder. And anytime I'm embossing BetterPress images, I do like to use superfine embossing powder when possible, especially when it comes to sentiments, because that press plate is metal and it presses into the cardstock, especially when you have a thicker cardstock. There's some really fine areas there, so I find that I get a better result with superfine embossing powder. Most of the time, if it's just sentiments, and for the rest of the sentiments that I'm going to be creating, I'm just doing it on Hammermill Cardstock, which is thinner, so you're not pressing into the paper quite as much. And for those, it's not quite as important to use superfine powder, but because I already have it out, and because I like how it gives a much crisper sentiment, I do use it for that. Once I have these pieces heat embossed, I'm going to match up the die sets with them, tape them in place with those pieces of Best Ever Craft Tape, and once again, I reuse them until they stop sticking. If there's room, I'll put both plates on at once, but for this one here, my plates overlapped a little bit if I put the sentiment one down, and that is the best way to ruin a plate is if you have them overlapped when you're die cutting, so you definitely don't want to do that. You want to make sure that there's space between each one of them. So I die cut the Martini glass with the girl in it first, and then I am die cutting my sentiments here. Once again, lining everything up and taping those dies in place just to make sure that my placement stays where I want it to and it doesn't shift and move on me. Once I have all of my sentiments ready to go, and I'm going to do it for all of the different sentiment sets, I will have a ton of sentiments ready to go for not only these cards that I'm creating, but for my future projects as well. And I always love having sentiments ready to go because sometimes when you just want to create something quick and easy, it's always nice having those sentiments ready to go. So I have my two images here, one of them hot foiled with that glimmer foil and one of them heat embossed on that watercolor cardstock. So the foiled one, I'm going to be coloring it with Copic markers. For the skin, I'm using EOO and EO2. The EOO is just going to do the base layer, and then the EO2 is going to be doing my shading. These areas aren't very big, so you don't need to do a lot of complex, deep shading to them. I find that just 2 colors is enough. If there's a larger area, you could add a 3rd shade to it just to deepen that shading. For the, she's wearing like a skirt. Sorry. The word just escaped me there. And I used E31. It's just kind of a tan color. You're really only going to see a tiny little sliver of it because the rest of it is in the liquid of the glass. And for that, I have R20 and R32. So for her skirt, I don't do many shading on it because you're only seeing just a tiny little bit of it. For the drink, I used the R20 first, and then I used the R32 for shading around the edges and towards the bottom. Then I go back with that R20 to blend those colors together. And I'm doing the same with the drink that she is carrying, or that's on the side of the glass as well. The shading for this is super, super easy. I'm not doing anything complicated. You could color it with whatever you wanted to, but I do like the fact that the Copic markers, you can do some shading and it doesn't make the paper start to pill. With that done, I can watercolor my other image, my heat embossed image. So for the skin, I'm using some Tattered Rose Distress Refill. Distress refills are one of my favorite ways to watercolor. I already have the refills to re-ink my pads. So I love the fact that it has a dual duty to it. I have my refills, you can't see it on screen because I've zoomed into what I'm watercoloring here. I have them in an alcohol ink palette. So this is just a palette that has, I think it's 36 different little wells in it. And I have a little label to the bottom right of each one of them saying what the color is. And I've also kind of watercolored on top of it so I can see the exact shade. Because especially with the darker shades, you can't actually see what color's in there. So I like to be able to see it. That refill though does not dry on or in those palettes, so you have to store them horizontally. For the rest of that image, I use tea dye for her skirt, and then for the drink, I use some Twisted Citron with some Mowed Lawn for the shading. I let that dry for a few moments, and then I went over the top of the liquid in the glass, both the one that she's sitting in and the one that's on the side, with some glossy accents, and then let it dry completely. Because I have this sitting on a sticky mat, I let it dry for probably about an hour and a half while I went and did some other things. I covered both the liquid in the glass as well as the stem of the glass and the base of the glass. And what this is going to do, it's going to add some glossy dimension to it. It's just going to give it some different texture to it. Not as necessary, in my opinion, for the foiled one, but I really like it, especially for the heat embossed and then watercolored one. It just adds some great texture and finishes it off, in my opinion. The last thing I did here was put just a little bit of stickles on the rim of the glass, just for a little tiny bit of sparkle. And that's something that I hadn't really planned at the beginning, but once I put that glossy accent in there, I just felt that it needed just a touch more. So for finishing these pieces off, I'm going to do with the one with the strawberry martini. I don't know what, I think it's martini. I'm using some of the solid hot foiled sentiments from the Prism with the Prism foil. I have the linear touch rectangles that I used to die cut the mat, as well as the wildflower cardstock piece that my die cuts are going to sit on. So I die cut them off screen, but I just really thought that dark background really showed off that foiled image and highlighted the color of the drink in there. To glue everything together, I'm using Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. So it's going to work when I go to assemble my die cuts later on. It also works really well for assembling my cards. So we have this gorgeous foiled image here colored with Copics, but the fact that that mat also is done with a solid hot foil piece really just finishes the whole thing off. For the next image, I'm using a piece of peridot cardstock here. I'm also using one of the dies from that linear touch rectangles pieces, and I'm going to emboss that rectangle into the piece of cardstock. So I have this piece of peridot cardstock trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I laid that piece on top of the rubber mat that comes with the Platinum 6 machine, then put my die on top of it, and then use the embossing plate. And that just presses the die into the cardstock, so you get an embossed look to it. This is a great way to use your background dies for a little bit of a different texture. It looks like an embossed background, but also different. Like it almost has a quilted looking back or look to it. You want to use the stacking in your machine for embossing a die cut. It's really, really easy to do, and just another way to use your dies. For the mat around this, I have a piece of fern cardstock trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And now I'm ready to add my heat embossed and colored images, as well as my sentiment there. So the rectangle on here is really, really subtle, but it just finishes it off and just adds a little bit of detail without taking attention away from the image and sentiment. So for my next card, I messed up my recording, so I don't have it recorded assembling this piece here. I have my glass die cut out of some matte silver cardstock. The drink inside is die cut out of some fern and peridot cardstock layered together. And I also have a piece of acetate trimmed or die cut to go on top of that, so it looks like a glass. The salt or sugar. I think it's sugar, salt. I had a conversation with my husband and I forget what the answer was. On the rim was done out of white glitter cardstock. So I assembled that together with the liquid glue, let it completely dry, and here we are. So I have some fern cardstock die cut for one of my frames, white cardstock for the inner frame, and those were both done with that Linear Touch Rectangles die set. I also have a lime here that's die cut using both the peridot cardstock, the fern cardstock, as well as rainforest cardstock. I've said fern a couple times and I think I meant rainforest. There's 3 different greens. For the drink, I used the light and the medium, and for the lime, I used all 3 of them. So here we have a very, very simple card, but that glittered cardstock on that rim adds a whole lot of texture to it, as well as the matte silver for the actual glass. I'm using this same die cut. Both of these are done with that Sip Ole die set. Here I'm going to create a shaker card with it. So for the upper layer, the first layer here that I'm gluing to a piece of acetate, this was die cut out of some cardstock from the Onyx brushed, or the Onyx Treasure cardstock pack. I'm using the brushed finish, so it has a little bit of shimmer to it. I glued that onto a piece of acetate for the front part of my shaker. And then I have 6 more die cuts here trimmed or die cut from black cardstock. These are going to create the actual shaker. So we're going to create a shaker element to go on the front of a card. So the back part of this piece is glued to a piece of white cardstock so that I can make that shaker element, have it separate, and then glue it on the cardstock where I want. You can see with that second die cut that I grabbed there, I took out the piece or the detail piece on the inside of the glass just because it's not necessary for the shaker part. Without having that in there, it's going to give it more, or give the pieces more room to move and shimmer and shake. And I'm just using some sequins from a past Crafty Advent calendar. So you can put whatever you want in here. I chose to do some pink sequins because it looked a little bit more like a strawberry margarita. Again, you can choose whatever color you want. So I have 6 pieces here. I am gluing them on top of each other, making sure that they are all lined up. This is something that's really, really easy to do, and it's a great way to create an interactive element on your cards. Obviously, it would only work for a die set that interactive element worked for, but it's just a fun way to change up, add something a little bit unexpected to them. So I have 6 here because I feel that that is a good thickness to not stand out on the card too much, but it gives that the bits that you put in the shaker enough room to move. The liquid glue works perfect here because you can move and shimmy everything in place and make sure all of those pieces are lined up. I will be waiting until everything is completely dry before I go and trim the pieces off the back. Once they are dry, I'm just using some detail scissors and I can trim that piece of cardstock off the back there. There isn't a die in this set that only does that back piece. If there was, I would die cut it and put it in there. The die that does the drink part is just a little bit too short, so it wouldn't completely cover the whole back as well as the whole front. So this works perfect. The shape is easy enough that you could, once it's dry and once you use a pair of detailed scissors, it's really easy to just trim this piece out. As I'm cutting, I do have my scissors angled underneath a little bit so that I don't have any of the either cardstock for the back or acetate for the front showing out of the side. So once this is trimmed, I can go and add the little bits to my shaker piece. So super simple. It takes longer to die cut it really than to assemble it. Now I'm picking out my sequins here. I want to make sure that I have enough, but I'm not going to assemble it quite yet. I'm going to put the front onto the back and just lift it up just so that I know that I'm not overfilling it or underfilling it. After adding just a little bit more, it's just a little bit too full. So I went and put a little bit back, and then that's just the right amount. So I'm going to take all of these bits out. When you glue them together, there's a tiny little bit of glue that goes on the inside of your shaker piece. I'm using a little bit of embossing powder tool in order to take the sticky from that. Now you're going to get a little bit of that back when you glue the front to the base of the card. You want to try to use enough glue to glue them together, but not so much that it seeps into the opening. You can also wait for that glue to completely dry, just so that there's no place for it to complete or to stick to those sequins. And again, you can use other things for this. I like the sequins. I already had them. They have a nice iridescent shine that coordinates with the prism foil that I'm using for the different sentiments for some of the other cards, as well as the fact that I just really like the color for what I was going to do to them. So with the top glued to the base, I can set that aside to dry and assemble my other pieces here. So I have some strawberries die cut. The front of them is die cut out of some wild berry cardstock, as well as I have one die cut out of blush cardstock, so that there's a couple different colors. The back of it is die cut out of some raven cardstock. Then I have some flowers here, die cut from chiffon cardstock. And then the center little bud there is, the center of the flower is die cut from some beeswax cardstock. All of my greenery here is die cut out of the rainforest cardstock. These pieces are super easy to put together with that liquid glue. And for the really tiny centers to the flowers, I just use my jewel picker to hold up those pieces and press them onto the centers of the flowers. The last step here is the little salted rims for the drink. So this, once again, is die cut from the white glitter cardstock from the Antique White Treasured Cardstock pack. It just works perfect because it adds that texture and it also adds that sparkle. For this card, I want to create a frame with the linear touch rectangles. So I have the size, or the outer size, that I want, and I taped the inner die on the inside so that it's nice and even. And when I go to die cut it, I don't have to worry about those moving on me. This is, again, just a different way to add a frame. Now, I could have just used the outer one and die cut it, and then use the inner one and die cut a white piece. That would have had a very similar look. But I just wanted to show you a different way that you could do that. You could create this frame and then create a shaker element with the frame by die cutting that a bunch of times. So there's just different ways that you can just add a little bit of interactiveness and texture to your cards. Now that I have the base of my card done, as well as my shaker element, I'm just going to plan out where I plan on putting these pieces. I have my clear acrylic block that I have holding that frame down while that glue dries. And that way I can see right through it, and I can figure out exactly where I want everything, but see it right on the base of the card. I'm going to glue one of my heat embossed sentiments to the top, and then I'm going to glue all of these little pieces. Now, the nice thing when you're doing a arrangement like this, with this liquid glue, it doesn't glue down right away. So you have some wiggle room to move and shift things. You also have that little bit of time that if you need to tuck a leaf underneath something, it's not stuck down so well that you can't do that. So I love the forgiveness that you have with this, and the open time, or the open drying time with this, so that you can move and shimmy things in place. I typically don't put the leaves on until last, because I use them to just kind of fill in different areas that I feel need just a little bit more color. If you do them at the beginning, sometimes you don't have them positioned quite right. So what I will typically do is I'll kind of put my arrangement on my block, or on my block, and I will set that to the side. I will do the outer flowers first, then I will glue the inner piece, and in this case it's the strawberries. Sometimes it'll be flowers. For one of my last cards, it's, I think, my second last card, it's going to be flowers that get glued to that centerpiece. And then finally comes the leaves, and I want to just kind of tuck them in different areas that I feel need that greenery. And sometimes that changes as I'm gluing those inner pieces down. So I always like to have that little bit of wiggle room there. Once I have those pieces glued down, I'm going to put my acrylic block on top of that just to let that completely dry. And then for just a touch bit more sparkle on the centers of some of those flowers, I just add a little bit of stickles and then let that dry. So that's just going to add a bit of texture to those flowers. And here we have another card with that Sip Ole die set, but it's got an interactive element to it. For the next two cards, I'm going to be using the Fountain Wishes. So I'm going to first do one with the bird and the balloons. I have the bird die cut out of some blush cardstock, but I want to add a little bit of brown to that bird. So I'm just doing a little bit of light ink blending with some Vintage Photo Distress ink, using my sticky mat to hold those pieces, but it's just going to give that bird a little bit more color to it. My balloons here are die cut out of two different finishes from that Antique White Treasured Cardstock pack. So I have one done with the glitter finish and one done with the pearl finish. I also have some done with the aquamarine treasured cardstock pack. I have the glitter finish one as well as one with the matte metallic. This is just going to give some interest to the front of the card. The fifth and final balloon is just die cut out of plain wild berry cardstock. So I just think it makes the balloons look really interesting to have those different textures to them. The strings for the balloons are die cut from some anchor cardstock, and they glue easily on there. And you can see that I'm using that acrylic block to hold everything in place while it's drying. It also frees up my hands to work on other things. So that is the bird and balloon that I'm doing for this card. For my next card, it'll be the glass with the ice cream. So the little party hat that's going to go on top of the bird's head was also die cut out of that wild berry cardstock that I die cut one of the balloons out of. And then the little streamers, or whatever you want to call them, coming out of them is done with that glittered aquamarine treasured cardstock. Now I'm ready to glue the bird together. So I added one of the pieces to the back of it for the eyes. The beak actually goes in between that. So you want to glue the beak on first, but I didn't realize that at first when I glued that piece in. That's the other great thing about using liquid glue. It gives you a little bit of forgiveness when it comes to things like that. You can easily just adjust it and fit things in where they're supposed to go rather than having to rip things apart because they've dried on you. Once that bird's been assembled, you can just add that little party hat to it. You could always add it afterwards, but it's always nice when the majority of the assembly is done ahead of time. For a background for this card, I'm going to add some texture to it by using an embossing folder. I have the Floating Balloons 3D embossing folder here. I'm just using a piece of Hammermill cardstock. You could do another color if you wanted to have a colored background to this. I typically choose white though, because I like the light backgrounds with the different die cuts on them. But this is just going to give a little bit more of that party balloon texture, but not add any distracting color to it or not take away from those die cuts. For the mat around this card or around the image piece, I'm trimming that to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and that is just some blush cardstock. The embossed piece is trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I always do that after I emboss it. That way, if during the embossing process it changes the sizes of the cardstock at all, I can trim that down and make sure that my final piece is the size that I want it to be. So with all my pieces ready to go, I'm ready to start assembling everything. Again, using that Barely Art glue. I use this for pretty much everything because it sticks really well. I've never had anything fall apart with it, but it gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. So I'm laying everything out on top of my acrylic block. Typically when I'm doing things like this, I have an idea in my mind how I want it to look. And just doing this makes you know for sure whether your layout is going to work or if there's some reason that it's not really going to come together. Something's comes up that you didn't think about. So it's always nice to be able to see it before you start gluing things together and coming up with a problem when you're in the middle of gluing. So I put down my sentiment first, then I put down that first balloon, and now I add that bird to the front, but I don't glue it down because I want my strings to cross about where the beak from the bird is. So it just gives me a visual idea of where that bird's going to be, or where the level of the beak is going to be, to know where to have my strings crossing each other. So that's why I put it there, but I didn't actually glue it down because I want it to go over top of where all of those strings meet. But I don't want to have them in an odd spot where it looks really weird to have the bird in that area. Once I have all of my balloons down, I glue that bird on top. Now I could leave it like this because there's a lot of different textures in here with the different cardstocks as well as the embossing, but I wanted to add just a little bit of glossy accents to the eye to give it some glossy shine to it. And then I added it to the frontmost balloon as well. I typically like putting glossy accents on balloons because I think it suits them, giving them that glossy shine to them, but you don't necessarily have to if you don't want to. So with that on there, I'm going to set that aside to dry and then work on my next card. So this is the one where I'm going to use that glass with the ice cream in it, or milkshake. It could be really either one. So for this one, my glass is trimmed out of pearl finish cardstock from the Antique White Treasured Cardstock pack. So the pearl finish one, it looks white, but when you tilt it into the light, it has gold shimmer to it. I have the pieces of the milkshake slash ice cream in the glass die cut out of the Wildberry, the blush, and the chiffon cardstock. My straw for in here is die cut out of the matte finish of the Aquamarine Treasured Cardstock pack. And then the sauce that goes on top of my ice cream is die cut from the glitter finish one. So I have some great different textures with the different cardstocks that are used. You could use regular cardstock if you want, but I always love the look of having different textures. I think it just immediately makes it look more interesting by using different textures of cardstock, different finishes, whether it's glossy or glittered or metallic. It just has some visual interest to it. For this particular card, I didn't add any acetate to give that glass a shine, but you certainly could do that if you wanted to. So sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't do it. For the matte for this card, I'm using some of that matte finish metallic from the Treasured Cardstock pack. Now, typically I would use this as my matte and die cut my pieces out of it. I didn't think about this ahead of time. It's one of those ways to just stretch your cardstocks, especially the more expensive metallic ones, specialty cardstocks. Again, I didn't think about it ahead of time. Otherwise, I would have done it. But I'm using that for the matte. That's trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. The inner part there is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm using 2 different sentiments for this card. One's going to go on the front of the card. One of them is going to go on the inside. So the one on the front is, it says something like wishing you a sweet birthday. And then the one going on the inside, it says, 'cause you're the cherry on top. And I figured both of those worked well together as well as worked well with the, image on the front. I chose the foiled sentiments for these ones because, again, I wanted to have that sentiment there, but I didn't want to take away from the image. But you could, if you want, use the heat embossed sentiments from the BetterPress. Both of them will work. I just really liked the look of the foiled on this one. For my next 2 cards, I'm going to be using the Special Toast die set. So for this one here, I just have all of the pieces die cut out of different colors of cardstock. I'm using, for the pinks, I'm using the Wildberry, the blush, and the chiffon again. My glass for this is die cut out of the matte silver cardstock from the Silver Treasured Cardstock pack. And then my greenery is die cut from Rainforest cardstock. So these pieces are really, really easy to put together. And I love the fact that these die sets have so many different options. So you can create many different looks with each one of them. Now for this particular set, I'm going to do one that's kind of, I'm going to use an anniversary sentiment, but you could do it as a wedding card. You could do it as an engagement card, just a celebratory card, I think. For the second card, I'm going to turn it into an interactive card. And I'm also going to change up the glass die set. So that'll give you more options, and that will work not only for this one, but it'll work for the other, or the first one, the Sip Ole as well. So I'm going to glue the pieces together first, and then I'm going to create an arrangement kind of similar to how I did the one with the flowers and the strawberries, but this time we're going to have all florals. For the background for this, I'm using the Scribbled Letter embossing folder. This is a 2D embossing folder, so you want to use the stacking in your machine for 2D embossing folders. I'm doing just Hammermill cardstock. Again, I want that texture, but I don't necessarily want color to it. For my matte, I'm using the remaining piece from the matte silver cardstock. This is the piece that I die cut the glass out of, and this is what I was talking about before with that aquamarine matte metallic. This way I have both the glass for the die cut for the front as well as my matte, and it's die cut of the same card or piece of cardstock rather than using 2 different pieces. My embossed piece here was trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I just put that in the center of that. Once again, gluing it with that liquid glue. And here I'm going to put everything onto my acrylic block. Just figure out my arrangement so that what I have in my head is I know it's going to work for the look that I'm going for. So typically when I do things like this, these ones have some ribbons hanging down. I'll put this center focal point, which is my big like roses there, and then I will tuck in some of the smaller flowers behind it. The medium-sized flowers for this one, I'm going to be tucking in after I have those other ones glued in. That way, if there's just openings that need something to fill them, those flowers will do that perfectly. So I glue my glass down first and then my foiled sentiment. So when I'm doing my sentiments here, I am using the coordinating sentiments. So for the Sip Ole die set, I use the Sip Ole sentiments. For the Fountain Wishes die set cards, I use the Fountain Wishes sentiments from the press plate and die set. And then for these ones here, the Special Toast, I'm using the sentiments from the Special Toast set. You can mix and match some of them, but a lot of them are kind of specific to the die set and the theme, if you will, of what they are. So I'm going to glue down the ribbons for this first, then I'm gluing down my inner florals, those roses, then I'm gluing the sprigs of flowers behind it, and then I will tuck in some of my greenery as well as those medium-sized flowers. So once again, I have kind of my main piece there, and then I use the greenery as well as those medium-sized flowers to just fill in areas that I feel need just a little bit of color, or just have something that needs to be covered underneath them. This set here has a few different florals as well as a few different pieces of greenery. You can mix and match them, or you can use just one set if you want. But there are also other dies in this set, and I'll be using some of them for my next card. So there's like a pair of wedding shoes, there's a bow tie, there's a top hat, there is a ring. So there's many different looks that you can get from this same set because of all the different elements that you have. By doing just the glass and then the florals, to me, this could easily be a wedding card. This could be an engagement card. It could be an anniversary card. It could just be a celebratory card. You could even do it as a birthday card, in my opinion, because it's just a glass with a bubbly drink in it. So there's a lot of different ways that you could use this, or occasions that you could use this for. Or you could use it for what I do my next card in, which is something completely different. It is going to be still a wedding or engagement card. However, I use the glass in a completely different way. So once again, for this card, I added the sentiment, or a sentiment to the front as well as a sentiment to the center. Then I'm using a little bit of stickles on the center of the tiny little florals just to give them a little bit of sparkle. So for my last card, I looked at the shape of this glass and I thought it kind of looks a little bit like a fancy chandelier or a fancy light with a glass bulb in it. Now I mess up my first one here when I'm die cutting it, but I wanted to share it to you because I wanted to share what I messed up here. I didn't put my the edge of my plate quite far enough down. So I wanted to cut a little bit into that stem so that I could line it up. What I didn't realize is there's a little slit that gets die cut at the bottom of the glass. It's just a little detail, which when you're just die cutting the glass, it doesn't make any difference. But for what I was doing here, it cuts the two pieces separate. So when I'm doing partial die cutting, I'm putting the end of my plate where I want my die cutting to stop. For this here, you can see that I'm shortening the stem of that die cut. That's what I'm doing here. So here I have those two pieces, and that only happened because there's a little detail on that die cut that cuts across it, and it ended up cutting the stem of it off. So I'm doing it a second time. This time I'm putting the edge of my plate just a little bit farther down on the stem of glass. So it's going to make it a little bit easier for me to line those two pieces up. And you can see when I die cut this, I get a little crease in my cardstock showing me where the edge of where I die cut. So it does make it a little bit easier when you're doing the second part of this. Some of the pieces from the inside of the glass stuck to my plate, so I take them off before doing that second die cutting. When I go to shift my die here, I line it up where I had it originally, and then I just slide it up to shorten the stem of that glass. Now I'm going to do this I'm going to use this for this card as a lamp. And I'm going to make it a light up lamp with a light from Pear Blossom Press, but you could use this as a glass that's shorter. So you don't have to use it as I'm using it, but I just wanted to show you a way to change that up a bit. And you can see here, we changed it, we shortened it by, I want to say almost an inch. I didn't actually measure how much shorter it is, but it's just a different way to change up your dies. And this doesn't just work with this type of die set. It works with many different die sets with straight edges. You could lengthen a rectangle, you could shorten it. So there's many different ways to use your dies. It's just a fun way to change it up and get more use out of your dies. For the lamp itself, I'm putting just a piece of vellum on there just to give it a little bit of translucentness, but not completely see-through. I want to kind of buffer that light a little bit. For the other details for this card, I'm using the shoes. So I have the base of the shoes die cut with that Wild Berry cardstock. The upper layer here is from some of the pearl white cardstock from the Treasured Cardstock pack. So this is the cardstock that looks white, but when you tilt it in the light, it has a gold shimmer to it. My tie is die cut from the brushed finished cardstock from the Onyx Treasure Cardstock pack. So this is the same cardstock that I used to die cut the glass, the black looking glass from my shaker card. So it almost looks like silk a little bit. It has a little bit of shimmer to it. For the ring, that is die cut from matte silver cardstock, and then the diamond itself is also die cut with that pearl finish antique white treasure cardstock pack. So for this card, I'm using one of the One Lights from Pear Blossom Press. The batteries come with it, but they come separate. There's a little plus sign on the battery as well as the little slot it gets slid into. You want to make sure that that plus sign lines up with the plus sign on that little slot there. Makes it really, really easy. And then you can see as I'm assembling things, I test things many, many times while I'm doing this. I don't want to get to the end of the card and find out I've done something wrong and it's not going to work. So I test it as I'm going. So for the background of this card, I'm using some Oceanside cardstock. For the opening for the light, I'm just using that little candle piece, the candle flame piece from the Fountain Wishes die set. I laid my die cut on top of my background here, put a little pencil mark where I wanted a hole for my light, and this die is going to give me that hole. And the bonus thing is that flame kind of looks a little bit like a light bulb. When you're doing these die or these cards, you don't really see the shape of that hole anyways. I just needed an opening and I needed it to be fairly small. So after die cutting that, I wanted to add a little bit of texture with embossing to my background. So I'm using the Damask 3D embossing folder. I lined it up with the pattern on the hole for my light with the pattern on the embossing folder. So everything is nice and centered. Now I know that that opening for my light is exactly where I want it to be from the top. So when I trim this down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, I'm trimming it to the two sides and the bottom. So I'm trimming 1/4 inch off of each side and 1/2 inch off of the bottom. And then I'm going to glue my light onto that opening. So when I'm laying my light on my desk here, I am going to lay the trigger button and the light itself vertically, kind of in a line, so that when I line up the opening with the hole, I know that the button is above it vertically. So that when I put my light there, or my chandelier piece, I know that that button is going to be about where the base meets the stem. So there is a die or a stamp set from Pear Blossom Press that says things like press, pull, blow. Typically, I would put that stamp where I want someone to press something. There's not really any room for it on that particular die cut, so I'm not going to do that for this card. But what I would do to give it to someone is I would put a Post-it note on the inside and just telling them what to do so that they know it's an interactive card. Now, to accommodate the space for that battery pack as well as the light, I need to use some foam tape. My foam tape here is not quite thick enough, so I'm going to be doing 2 layers of it. I don't do any of the foam tape up at the top where that piece is. I could do it. I could cut the pieces down and just kind of fit it in there. There's enough foam tape around it that I didn't feel that it was quite necessary. So after adding that second layer, I can take my backing off, and you can see my tape wants to make that cardstock curl. So I'm really careful when I'm putting this onto the base of my card. I'm not doing a matte for this particular one because I wanted the focal point to be my light, my die cuts, and that background. I didn't really feel it needed to be framed in any way. So with that onto the base of my cardstock, I can add the rest of my die cuts. So I have a little oval piece that was die cut from Anchor cardstock. It's just going to give a base for my pieces to go. This piece is from this die set. It's for the top of a drink. So it's just a little bit bigger than the oval that gets die cut when you die cut the glass. But again, it's going to give just a little place for like a base for my die cuts to go. I have 2 of my heat embossed sentiments. I'm going to put one on the inside and one on the outside. I can't remember what the inside says, but the outside says something about look at that sparkle. And I thought that was perfect for the light shining on the ring, showing off the sparkle. So I add the bow tie to the background, the shoes to the background, and then I'm going to put the ring on the top of it. You could change up the arrangement if you wanted. I just really loved those shoes and I loved that little bow tie. The last step here, I wanted to add a little bit more glossy dimension shine to the diamond in the ring. So I added some glossy accents to that and then let that completely dry. So here is the finished card. And again, it's just a different way to use that glass. So you don't necessarily have to use it as a lamp with the pieces from this die set. You could use it as a lamp with pieces from other die sets, but just a fun way to change it up, do something a little bit unexpected with it. And those light cards are really quite easy to make with those Pear Blossom Press lights, and there's many different ones to choose from, but it just adds an interactive element to your card. Then we have the second card done with that special toast die set. Again, just a beautiful card, but a really different vibe from that last one. Then we have our ice cream milkshake one with the fountain wishes done with some of those metallic cardstock. So it has that little bit of shimmer and shine to it with those different finishes. And then our adorable little birthday bird with the balloons, and the texture on the background coordinates perfectly with the texture of the balloons that little bird is holding. Then we have our two cards made with that Sip Ole. First, we have our shaker card with the sequins in the center of it. And again, those can be done in any colors with whatever little bits you have to add to the inside of those cards. Just a fun way to create something unexpected. Then we have our little lime margarita there with that salted rim as well as the wedge of lime on it. Again, a fun one. And there's so many different options in those sets to add little elements to it. Then we have our Martini Mood cards. This one here done with the greens. And I just love the glossy accents on the liquid in the glass. It just finishes them off really, really well. Then our foiled one again. Finishes it off really well with that glossy accents, but I love it in those two different colors. Really, I couldn't decide which color I wanted to do it in, so it was great to be able to do it in both colors and see them both ways. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.